we will discuss the introduction to cognitive ergonomics. And in today's lesson, there are 5 key areas that we're going to be discussing today. First, we have cognitive limitations exist in the workplace. Second, the human capabilities and limitations. Third, we have the different human senses. Fourth, we have the human cognitive practices. In order for us to get started, let us discuss first the key area of our lesson for today, which is cognitive limitations exist in the workplace. Now, cognitive aspects of a workplace concern the sensory signals that give our brains the clues and cues to understand a task or to solve a problem, correct? Now, your task as an engineer is to actually create the best possible conditions for workers to correctly interpret the task and task status in order to avoid danger, errors, confusion, irritation, and mental overload. Now, this is obviously a very powerful design area which can make or break a worker's ability to understand what to do in the workplace. In other words, we are moving focus from the physical to the mental in this chapter. And many cognitive aspects have to do with our interpretation of sensory stimulus or stimuli, which refer to our vision, hearing, touch, the sense of smell, and the sense of taste as well. Our capability to recognize patterns, our understanding of instructions, and our ability to associate symbols with meaning. Now, the brain is constantly handling cognitive processes even during sleep, if you can notice, and often needs to be well rested and nourished to work optimally. However, it is not uncommon that work is performed in a state of fatigue, which adds limitations to our cognition, attention, perception, memory, and mental models. Now, with some basic knowledge of good cognitive design principles, a production engineer can minimize unnecessary mental workload and help an operator perform their work tasks more efficiently and with fewer errors and misinterpretations. This theoretical knowledge can contribute to the design of workplaces, instructions, machines, tools, and activities that communicate better to the worker how to achieve their goals. Now, this chapter also brings up some examples of currently existing cognitive support solutions used in modern production. Now, which roles benefits from this knowledge? Now, the roles that can benefit from this knowledge, that would be systems performance improver. We also have the purchaser. And finally, we have the work environment or safety specialist. Now, why can systems performance improver benefit from this knowledge? Because the systems performance improver understands human cognitive abilities and limitations as well, will be able to specify requirements for appropriate equipment, instructions, and human-machine interfaces that can aid workers in doing tasks efficiently and correctly. And on the other hand, the purchaser can benefit from this knowledge because the purchaser will be able to better understand the value of investing in human-machine systems that transmit information and instructions as quickly and intuitively as possible. Now, for both these roles, there is an economic argument that workers with good cognitive support commit fewer errors, leading to better product quality and less waste and scrap. But this may need to be proven with a business case and translated into a prospect of higher quality and or productivity to convince a purchaser. And finally, the last role which can benefit from this knowledge is the work environment or safety specialist, because the work environment or safety specialist can actually use this knowledge to pinpoint safety hazards and risks for error that can be traced to signals and information being missed or misinterpreted due to sensory distraction or insufficient cognitive support. So, what cognitive limitations exist in the workplace then? Well, human workers are still preferred in many assemblies over robots because of their superior ability to respond to variations in assembly instructions and quickly take decisions to adjust deviations from the normal place, which is actually correct because the robots, okay, that we are currently using right now in our workplaces, they cannot actually respond to variation. However, cognitive limitations in the workplace include first, the fact that the human is a thinking, learning, processing being that is constantly changing and also poses some consistency problems for performance. Now, sometimes we cannot deny the fact that even on the basis of plenty of experience, humans can misinterpret information, make mistakes, or make ill-advised choices, like deciding to take shortcuts in a process, which has in the past resulted in dire consequences such as costly, unnecessary mistakes, or even fatal consequences for health and safety. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me give you an example. So, for example, the partial nuclear meltdown of the 3 Mile Island power plant in Pennsylvania, USA in 1979. This is according to United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission 2013. Now, this emergency is attributed to operator error and several human factors errors that caused the plant operators to misunderstand the process, ignore status alerts, miss alarm signals, and shut down the wrong functions. And the bad cognitive ergonomics of the plant schematics or instructions, machine interfaces, and alarm signal system led to partial core meltdown, radioactive contamination, and enormous public distrust and backlash against the nuclear energy sector. And second, in more production related cases, the same assembly line and operators may be used to produce multiple variants of a product where the fundamental elements are the same, but subtle differences exist. And this can often cause confusion or errors, leading operators to assemble parts incorrectly. Now, this in turn causes defects and quality issues as well further down the line, resulting in unnecessary costs and reworks. Many have attempted to address this issue with varying degrees of success through the use of various different methods, which will be outlined later in this chapter. All right. And the second key area of our lesson for today, that would be human capabilities and limitations. Now, take note that up to this point, this book has mainly focused on the human locomotive system and ways to improve physical well-being and performance. And in this chapter, we focus on the abilities and limitations of the human mind and senses, which work together to process and interpret information from our environment and formulate goals for action. This is what constitutes a human's cognitive abilities. Now, as you can see in figure 5.1, it presents the human brain, which interprets information from the external environment. And the human capabilities and limitations, first, we have our mental capacity changes with age, because both improving and declining depending on training and genetic factors. And second, our cognitive abilities are a combination of skills, experience, pattern recognition, attention, memory, ability to focus, expectations, associations, generalization, and the ability to sort information into categories. And the last human capability and limitation, we have our physical well-being have a significant impact on the above mentioned ability. For example, if we try to perform mentally intensive work tasks when we are tired, overstimulated, stressed, emotionally or chemically affected, alarmed, distressed, or hungry, our brain may transfer from a mode of high functioning thought, meaning I'm referring to planning, reasoning, evaluating, to survive mode one, or instinctive, quick actions to evade danger or discomfort, which may at worst result in negative effects ranging from small mistakes to fatal accidents. Now, in particular, human abilities are actually drastically limited by being in a state of fatigue. And take note that fatigue can contribute to mistakes and accidents, right? Especially for tasks requiring sustained vigilance, such as observing a monotonous process that may change suddenly. And this works both ways. Poorly designed cognitive supports and tasks that routinely cause mental overload can also contribute to chronic fatigue, leading to demotivation, ill health, and absenteeism. And so, for that matter, having said that, in general, we can tell that a cognitively well designed work system can actually lessen the impact of fatigue by minimizing the ability to perform incorrect or dangerous actions. And the more demanding the task or the more stressful the situation, the more important carefully designed cues become. All right. So the next key area that we're going to be discussing now, that would be the human senses. And commonly, it is said that humans have 5 senses, right? Which are listed here. Okay, as you can see, we have human senses from most to least dominant. So from most to least, we have vision, hearing, the sense of touch, smell, and taste. Now, take note that the senses convey information about our surroundings and the internal state of our own bodies by receiving stimuli through different receptors and sending them via the nerves to the brain for processing. While the latter two senses, the smell and taste, okay, are seldom intentionally used for communicating information and are therefore not described here in depth. A combination of visual, auditory or hearing, and tactile or touch, okay, examples would be vibrations, make up the majority of signals that are transmitted to humans in a workplace setting. And additionally, humans are said to have a sense of balance and muscle sense, both of which can be used to interpret our surroundings and act accordingly. For example, the sensation of gravity telling us which way is up. However, this sense can be confused by contradicting signals from our other dominating senses. And therefore, in order for us to better understand each of our senses, let us discuss them one by one, starting with vision. Now, if we say vision, it is the most dominant sense that humans use. Our field of vision in total extends about 170 degrees horizontally. The outer rim or the peripheral of the field is good at detecting movement, but not detailed information. And therefore, we are dependent on viewing detailed information in our central field of vision. And the light is a form of electromagnetic radiation whose different wavelengths are interpreted by human eyes as different colors. And the visual photoreceptors in the eyes are called the rods and the cones. Now, what's the difference between the two? If we say cones, the cones are very sensitive to small differences in shape and color, but require good lighting to function. On the other hand, the rods are much more numerous and more sensitive to seeing in dim light, but they cannot distinguish color. So you need to take note as well that our sense of vision is connected with our perception, which is actively looking for patterns and structures that our mental bank can recognize as meaningful. And as you can see in figure or in table 5.1 rather, it shows the several parameters affecting sensory processing of light. Now, as you can see, the parameters that we have are the following. We have contrast, color, dark adapted vision, depth perception, movement detection, and we also have glare. Okay, so these are our parameters that influence vision. For example, in contrast sensitivity is our ability to distinguish between light and dark, right? Allowing us to see lines, text, shapes, and contours of objects. High contrast means that there is a large difference between black and white in the field of view. On the other hand, low contrast means more subtle differences on a gray scale. In other words, our contrast sensitivity decreases as we age, meaning that it becomes more important that readable information should have enough differentiation between black and white. Okay? On the other hand, if we see color as a parameter that influences vision, take note that color is the result of how our brains interpret and distinguish different wavelengths of light, correct? And the receptors that dominate color vision are the cones, which are centrally located in the eye's retina. And different people have different abilities to distinguish and interpret different colors depending on age, education, culture, and even genetic preconditions such as color blindness and so on and so forth. So, in other words, in general, as we age, our visual abilities tend to deteriorate from the approximate age of 40. That's 40. Especially our capacity to detect low contrast, small symbols, and weak stimuli. And this makes good task lighting and clear visual cues with sufficient size and time duration extra important when designing tasks, interfaces, and environments for a whole work population. And as you can see in table 5.2, it shows some of the design principles for visual information. So the design principles for visual information that we have, that would be the intensity, the choice of color, strength of lighting, contrast, and of course, we have angle of vision. And aside from vision, the next human sense that we have, which is very important, is our hearing sense. Now, what is meant by human hearing? If we say human hearing, like vision, it is tightly coupled to our cognitive pattern recognition skills, which helps us distinguish many nuances of sound. Most of us can correctly identify the direction a sound comes from, or the volume and the pitch, allowing recognition of melodies. And even when certain signals concern us or not, such as when hearing our name spoken in a noisy environment, or being able to filter out sounds that carry no meaning for us, in some cases known as selective hearing. Now, as you can see in table 5.3, it shows the parameters that influence sound and hearing. So the parameters that influence sound or hearing, that would be the loudness or the amplitude, the pitch or the frequency, and we also have the location or direction. For loudness, take note that sound travels in waves, right? Which have different amplitudes corresponding to loudness. So the softer the sound, the lower the amplitude, the higher the sound, the higher the amplitude as well. And the ear has limits for how much loudness it can tolerate before permanent hearing injuries occur. And for the pitch parameter, pitch or frequency or the wavelength of sound defines the tone of the sound and differences in pitch delivered in a sequence can be distinguished by the human ear as melody or signals that can be associated with meaning. The human ear and body has sensitivity to a wide range of frequencies, but is unable to hear very high pitches well, such as dog whistles. And finally, the last parameter that influences sound and hearing is location or direction. And thanks to stereo hearing involving both of our ears, humans can now determine which direction a sound is coming from by interpreting the differences in loudness and pitch between the two ears. And this ability is to exact that it is actually possible to create sound illusions that convince a listener that a sound source is moving in space. And this is done by recording sound in a quiet room using two separate microphones spaced apart by about the width of a human head. And so for that matter, having said that, we can tell that sound is a particularly effective complement to vision when we are overloaded by visual stimuli. And sound can be used to bring attention to changes in process status, to warn of danger, to indicate distance, such as warning systems for backing a vehicle, or to confirm correct actions. And because of that, since sound is a form of vibration, the body perceives audible sound via vibration of the inner ear, while non-audible sounds are perceived as vibrations. Particularly, subsonic or low frequencies have been known to cause whole body vibrations that cause nausea and feeling of discomfort and depression. Also, it is important to remember that hearing abilities change with age as well. And notably, there are high-pitched frequencies that can be heard primarily by young people, but this ability diminishes already in early adulthood. However, hearing loss can also occur as a result of exposure to noisy environments. But this is injury-driven hearing loss rather than age-related. All right, so the next human sense that we will be talking now, that would be touch, or the sense of tactile, also known as haptics. So if we say tactile senses or haptics, these are what allow us to perceive differences in pressure, temperature, and frequency, as in vibrations, most frequently through nerve receptors in our skin, sensitive to stimulation from bending of hairs in the skin and to pain. And particularly, the hands are sensitive to very small sensations, but evolution has made most of our skin able to register slight touches, as light as that of a spider web. And next key area that we're going to be discussing now, that would be the human cognitive processes. Now, if we say cognition, it is the overall process of handling information, meaning it is the combination of sensory stimulation, focus, perception, working memory, long-term memory, and interpretation, leading to decision-making and response. And there are two categories of mental processing of information. First, we have bottom-up, and second, we have top-down. If we say bottom-up, it means that the process is in response to sensory stimuli and is unconscious or automated. As you can see in our example, so you ask the question, what am I seeing? Okay, in bottom-up processing, what you do is to take sensory information and then assemble it and then integrate it. Okay. On the other hand, if we say top-down, it means that it is conscious chain based on desires, previous experience or knowledge, expectations, and generalizations. So in top-down processing, we ask the question, is that something I've seen before? Okay, so what you do here is to use models, ideas, and expectations to interpret sensory information. And the first key subtopic that we have under human cognitive processes, that would be attention. And if we say attention, it means devoting a human's mental resources to a task or event at hand. And if we say undivided attention, it focuses all our cognitive processing capability to one stimulus. And take note that when our attention is divided between two or more information sources, our ability to correctly process stimuli and interpret information is decreased. So when does human attention function best then? Well, human attention functions best when events come at regular, relatively frequent intervals, but once activity frequency is too low, our attention levels fall, and there is a risk that small status changes or subtle signals will be missed. Now, the ability to keep focus on a process for duration of time is called alertness or vigilance. Now, since humans are not naturally good at remaining vigilant for a long time, it is important to support attention using enough sensory stimulation, okay? Now, the right amount of pressure and the right frequency of activity. And second, a lack of this support is called monotonous task or environment and leads to boredom and decreased motivation. And finally, boredom is a mental state where our brain deactivates certain nervous centers and the human experiences weariness, lethargy, and decreased alertness. And in this state, humans are less to perform tasks well or respond to sudden stimuli, and lapses in attention can lead to quality losses, accidents, and inferior performance. Okay? And the second key subtopic that we have under human cognitive processes, that we have memory. If we say memory, it is the process that allows learning through storage of information, experiences, and rules in the brain. So what's the difference between the two then? If we say long-term memory, it allows us to store new information temporarily in order to make sense of patterns and relationships between data points and mentally process the information into coherent chunks that can be stored in the long-term memory. And on the other hand, the short-term memory also works as to recall recent events up to a couple of hours ago. However, our short-term memory capacity is limited in how many new information points it can take in at once. And an established rule of thumb is the rule of 7, which states that 7 plus minus 2 is the maximum number of unrelated items the short-term memory can store at the same time. It is possible to train the short-term memory performance to increase capacity, mainly by using technique called framing. And if we say framing, it means actively identifying a pattern, category, or sequence that groups or contextualizes the items into coherent chunk. For example, associating items with a story, an experience, or a theme. So that's what we call framing. And one way to decrease the load on working short-term memory thereby is to practice tasks and movements until they are stored in the long-term memory. And this training decreases a human sensitivity to stress by liberating working memory so that its limited capacity is no longer occupied by routine actions. Now, as you can see in table 5.4, it shows the categories of memory. As you can see, this is categorized into two. We have declarative memory, which requires active recall. And we also have non-declarative memory, which does not require active recall. And under declarative memory, we have semantic memory and episodic. The difference between the two is that if we say semantic memory, this refers to meanings, concepts, and understandings. Examples of these are language, abstract knowledge about the words. On the other hand, if we say episodic memory, these refer to past personal experiences and events known as autobiographical memory. Examples of these are places, dates, times, associated emotions as well. And on the other hand, for non-declarative memory or type of memory or a category of memory that does not require active recall, this includes procedural and perceptual. If we say procedural memory, it is also known as implicit memory, okay? This type of memory is associated with motor learning and it's not consciously recalled, but translates automatically to actions or movements. And examples of procedural memory that would be riding a bike or tying shoelaces. And finally, we have perceptual memory, and this allows recognition of sensory stimuli as meaningful. Examples would be recognizing faces, voices, or smells. And the ability to recall and store information both from short-term and long-term memory is deteriorated, right? But why is that so? Well, our ability to recall and store information is deteriorated due to stress, fatigue, hunger, disturbing sounds, etc. Particularly stress can affect the capacity of our short-term memory to the point where tunnel vision occurs, leaving the human fixated on handling only one information source and unable to take in additional sensory stimuli or a situation which could prove to be dangerous. Some memory recall deterioration may also result from age, but this is highly individual. Keeping the mind active and stimulated can lessen such effects. And the third key subtopic that we have under human cognitive processes, that would be perception. So what do we mean by perception? If we say perception refers to our capacity to take in information from the environment, associate it with the meaning, and mentally organize it, okay? Now, this capacity is based on previous recognition, knowledge, and experiences, which gives us a basis for selecting, interpreting, and categorizing information. And this basis for making meaning is what creates our mental models or expectations of how things appear. And these preconceptions speed up our mental processing capacity, but also make us susceptible to illusions. So what is meant by illusions? These are when our interpretation of sensory signals are mismatched with reality. Examples of illusions, we have optical illusion, and we also have brain automatically filters out information that it has learned to sort as meaningless. Now, in order for us to better understand this, let me show you an example. Now, as you can see in figure 5.2, it shows examples of optical illusion. Now, for letter A example, as you can notice, okay, in some cases, we see things that aren't necessarily there, as in Caniza triangle. And in letter B example, we interpret the size of identical shapes, like the orange dots are the same size, incorrectly due to confusing clues from surrounding information, as in the Ebbinghaus illusion. Now, as you can see in figure 5.3, it shows an example when our brain automatically filters out information that it has learned to sort as meaningless. Now, in this example, as you can see, many people cannot see anything wrong with this book title. Can you? Well, if you are observant enough, this book title is written with an extra the, right? If we try to read the title, we have Paris in the spring, right? So there is a repetition of the word the. So a subject is asked to read the text and will often jump to conclusion and fail to notice the extra the, especially when there is a line break between the two lines. So this is an example of illusion as well. All right, so the next key subtopic that we have under human cognitive processes, that would be mental models. So what do we mean by mental models? If we say mental models, they provide a language for speaking about expectations that people have. For example, the word tree is a visual or auditory signal that carries a symbolic meaning, right? But that symbol does not actually tell us what the tree looks like, how tall is it, how wide or how leafy it is. And also, mental mode of a factory. So what do we mean by mental models then? If we say mental models, they provide a language for speaking about expectations that people have. So what is important is that these expectations sometimes lead a worker or user to look for specific cues in order to interpret their surroundings or a machine interface, and will then interpret them according to previous knowledge and experiences. And there may sometimes be a mismatch of the mental model with the actual reality, which can result in errors or mistakes. And therefore, it is very important to clearly convey the correct mental model of a tool, product, or system. And this is especially true for instructions and in education or training. So examples of mental model, first example, we have the word tree is a visual or auditory signal that carries a symbolic meaning, but that symbol does not actually tell us what the tree looks like, how tall is it, or how wide and how leafy it is. Now, in this example, adults have learned that a tree can appear in many different ways and still be classified as a tree. This means that the mental model of a tree has some degree of uncertainty, but can generally be expected to have a trunk, branches, and leaves. However, palm tree may set different expectations on what tree looks like, and depending on what kind of palm tree a human has encountered before, they may expect anything from a very long, smooth trunk with long leaves and coconuts at the top to a short, wide mess of rough, fibrous trunk exploding into an array of fan-shaped pleated leaves. And these are examples of two different mental models of a palm tree, and they are based on knowledge, experience, and cultural background. And the second example is mental model of a factory. Now, take note that in different minds, the expectations of what a factory looks like may be very different depending on familiarity with different sectors, exposure to historical or cultural representations, childhood encounters, etc. All right. Next key subtopic under human cognitive, that would be the role of expertise, the SRK model, and types of mistakes. Now, as we practice anything, be it physical or cognitive, we actually gradually develop skills, correct? And having said that, we progress from being a novice or a beginner who is dependent on instruction via an intermediate state where we become less dependent on confirmation that we are doing things right, to a highly skilled state of being an expert where actions, rules of thumb, and cause-effect relationships have been internalized and stored in our long-term memory, or figuratively in our bones. Now, this progression from novice to expert has been described by a classic theory known as Rasmussen's SRK model, short for skills, rules, knowledge. This theory states that humans make decisions and solve problems in three different modes. First, we have the S or skill-based. In skill-based, actions performed without consciousness and routine actions. This also includes sensory motoric responses. For R or rule-based, here, actions governed by rules, procedures, and old knowledge involves recognizing signs and associating to related process status, which is then associated with stored rules. And finally, for knowledge-based, here, actions require explicit thinking and problem-solving skills based on identifying the meaning of symbols and making a plan, includes trial and error. Now, always remember, class, that a novice frequently operates in the knowledge-based mode, okay, dominated by cognitive processes that are highly dependent on short-term working memory, which is limited in how much new information it can store. And so for that matter, novices or beginners can therefore need more time to interpret and perform tasks as well. And as they learn, intermediate novices gradually adapt more rule-based action, which is based on accumulated stored knowledge. An expert, on the other hand, acts and reacts almost instinctively in the skill-based mode with greater task speed and fewer mistakes. And when errors do occur, they are more like slips or lapses of concentration. Simply put, sloppiness. Okay? And a related theory by Reason, 1990, characterizes different types of errors that relate to different levels of cognitive processing. We have slip, lapse, and mistake. Slip, correct. For slip, it refers to correct plan but incorrect action, easily observable. And for the lapse, it refers to correct plan but incorrect action, more unnoticed causes such as forgetting. And for the mistake, it refers to incorrect plan caused by incomplete or incorrect knowledge. Okay? And the next key subtopic under human cognitive perception, that would be mental workload. Now, take note that measuring mental workload is complex because an assessment of total workload should, to be fair, take consideration of all the different components of cognition and of surrounding factors that are known to influence mental performance. And also, many of these factors are hard to measure objectively, which leads to the conclusion that measuring mental workload is often a measurement of the individual's perception of it. However, this information is still useful as it can be used as a before and after type baseline for evaluating cognitive ergonomics improvements. And if a measurement is made before a change and the individuals as perceived an improvement after it, the mental workload can be interpreted as lessened for that workforce. Now, NASA or NASA ND and Hart and Steveland 1988 has developed a rough questionnaire method for measuring total mental and physical workload called the NASA TLX. Now, as you can see in figure 5.4, it shows the NASA TLX form with its 6 subscales, which are mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, performance, effort, and frustration. Now, this questionnaire actually lets individuals rate their workplace or task with regard to 6 different components of physical and cognitive loading and support. And the next key subtopic that we have, that would be designing to support human mental capacities. And under this subtopic, we have design principles. Now, the following sections offer specific design principles geared at supporting the human cognitive capabilities of attention, perception, memory, and mental models as well. Now, this list is adapted from a more extensive one by Bogard 2009, pages 394 to 399. Now, the 13 design principles are: first, we have to minimize time and effort for finding information. Second, proximity or closeness. Third, engage multiple senses. Fourth, legible displays. Fifth, we have appropriate number of information levels. Six, avoid only knowledge-based data. Seven, redundancy. Eighth, avoid similar objects. Ninth, minimize the amount of short-term memory data. 10th, we have show anticipated system status. 11th, we have consistent or natural representation, followed by illustrated realism. And finally, we have show movable objects for dynamic information. Now, in order for us to better understand them, let us discuss them one by one, starting with the first design principle, which is minimize time and effort for finding information. Now here, take note that efficiency and motivation of work decreases when too much time and effort is spent searching for relevant information, correct? Now, this includes having to look for information in different places, in different menus, displays, etc. Frequently, used information should be easily accessible and emphasized, and thematically related information should be grouped together. For proximity or closeness, similar or related information sources should be visually linked, meaning there is a use of physical nearness. Indicators such as lines, arrows, or boxes, or a uniform format of color, pattern, shape, typeface, or the like. Now, in the case of auditory signals, use easily recognizable differences in pitch, loudness, repetition rate, rhythm, and melody to distinguish similar and non-similar information. And for the third design principle, which is engage multiple senses, here, when needing to pay attention to large amounts of simultaneous information, it actually helps to engage multiple senses, alternate between vision, sound, and touch to deliver different types of signals. And for number 4, legible displays, take note that legibility means possibility to read. Okay, now support perception of text using high contrast, appropriate illumination, sufficiently large text, a clear font, and correct viewing angle. And from an auditory perspective, we need to make use clearly of distinguishable sounds. For example, we need to use a clearly different pitch to the surrounding ambient sounds that normally occur in the environment. And as for loudness, remember that the purpose is to convey information, right? Not to jolt, scare, or distract the listener. And for both of these aspects, we need to be careful to design so that legibility is possible for elderly workers with decreasing vision and hearing. And for number 5, appropriate number of information levels. So it is advisable here to limit levels of information to 3. Again, we should limit the information to 3 since increasingly nested structures challenge expectations of where to look for information and take a long time to search through. And to ensure that color vision impaired can distinguish between colors in an interface, it is advisable to limit color codes to 2. Okay, so it is also hard to distinguish more than 5 levels of the line thickness, shape differences, or fonts. And for number 6 design principle, we have avoid only knowledge-based data. This means that the preconceptions and expectations of a human will override purely responsive reactions to stimuli, and therefore, to ensure that unexpected signals are correctly interpreted, such messages must be reinforced and emphasized. For example, with more central placement on display, flashing, size increase or color change. And for number 7, we have redundancy design principle. In regards to redundancy, it is possible to reinforce accurate information of a message if it is presented in more than one way, using several modalities or senses. For example, both visual and auditory cues can be used for alarms, and more than one sensory representation in the same sensory domain, and more than one sensory representation in the same sensory domain, such as image plus text, shape plus color, or sound signal plus voice. And for number 8, avoid similar objects. What do we mean by this design principle? Now here, as much as possible, when stimuli appear to be similar, the brain associates the same meaning to them, which may lead to confusion or misinterpretation if they have different functions or meanings, right? And therefore, it is important to signal differences in function with clear differences in appearance, size, duration, placement, structure, etc. And the 9th design principle, we have minimized the amount of short-term memory data. Now here, as far as possible, free the short-term memory from loading, meaning you need to use the operator's real-world knowledge and learned behaviors to lessen dependency on working memory resources. So we need to make use of the idea of the magical number 7 plus minus 2 as a maximum for simultaneous sensory stimuli. And for number 10, design principle, that would be show anticipated system status. In this design principle, the system or interface to signal future states. For example, showing a progress bar in software. Now, this being said, this actually will remove the mental load from the operator of calculating or guessing what will happen next based on available data and makes the task into a simpler perspective one. And for number 11, we have consistent or natural representation. For number 11, if operators are used to a particular configuration interface design, changing the design too drastically from the familiar layout may be a source of mistakes and slips, okay? Which is actually correct. And no design should correspond to learned rules and interpretations among the operator. And for number 12 design principle, we have illustrated realism. If we say illustrated realism, here we need to use visual cues that correspond to reality when designing information. And the aim is to correspond to the operator's mental model of a measurement, such as showing temperature on a vertical scale, or a place, such as a process status display, where machine statuses should be arranged the same way as the machines in reality. And finally, the last key design principle that we have is to show movable objects for dynamic information. Now here, we need to make use of animation, sound modulation, and other dynamic representations, making sure that movements indicating status changes over time match the operator's mental model of the process change. For example, a sound that decreases in pitch might correspond to a sinking or lowering movement, right? And the last key subtopic of our lesson for today, that would be the cognitive ergonomics supports use. Now, having introduced the concepts of cognitive ergonomics and the capabilities of the human mind, we will now bring it closer to home and look at how this topic affects the operator in production industry, and many different tools and methods that aid in the operator from a cognitive perspective exist in the assembly environment, limiting the mental capacity required. And interestingly, a number of these methods came about purely from the desire to optimize the performance of systems rather than to specifically provide operators with cognitive support. Now, the added cognitive benefit sort of came about as an added bonus almost unintentionally. And this section will introduce various different ways in which cognitive ergonomics considerations are effectively being used in the production environment. Now, the key aspects we will discuss here are the design for assembly, the use of fixtures, kitting, standardized work instructions, Poka-yoke, or what we call as mistake proofing. And examples of Poka-yoke, we have pick by barcodes, pick by light, pick by voice, and the Andan systems. Now, it is important to note that no single solution is accepted as the go-to standard approach, okay? Rather, the solution is dependent on the nature of each individual business at that time, given their unique requirements, size, strengths, and weaknesses. And in some cases, businesses also choose to adopt one approach at one time and then switch to another or multiple approaches as no issues arise within their business activities. And typically, this decision depends on the characteristics such as cost, quality, delivery time, reliability, production systems flexibility, and product flexibility as well. Now, certain concerns are generally considered to have a higher priority than others at different times. And all of these support systems are based on the idea that it should be hard to do things wrong, okay? Now, in order for us to better understand all of these support systems used, let us discuss them one by one, starting with the design for assembly, okay? So as you can see in our sample images, these are examples of design for assembly. And a recurring problem in industry is that all too often, the product is designed without consideration of the fact that the product has to be put together by an assembler in a production facility. So if we say design for assembly, it is a method which aims to encourage designers to think about the assembly implications of their design. For instance, by minimizing the number of required components and enabling as simple an assemble method as possible. Now, this should in turn lead to reduced times and cost during manufacturing stage while maintaining quality. And second, design for assembly also aims to enhance the level of communication between the manufacturing and design teams to ensure an optimized solution meeting the requirements of both parties is achieved. Now, taking DFA or design for assembly into consideration during all stages of the product's design and development, right from its conception, actually reduces the need to make design changes late in the process, correct? And the DFA or design for assembly procedures and design rules that should be followed differ differently on whether the product is manually or automatically assembled. And finally, the general DFA guidelines try to address two key areas: the handling of parts and the way in which parts are connected or fastened. Now, the basic concepts of DFA methodology will be briefly introduced in the next slide. However, to gain a full understanding of this method, the exact details or on how to carry it out on a real product and the quantitative tools that exist can be found in Boothroyd Product Design for Manufacture and Assembly 2002. So the following are general guidelines that should be considered during the design of products, as they will have a positive impact on the assembly stage of the product, aiding the operator with their work tasks from both a physical and cognitive perspective. Where possible, parts should be first, use geometrical features, symmetrical or obviously asymmetric for instances where symmetry cannot be achieved. Also, design parts that cannot be attached incorrectly. Third, use shapes or features that ensure parts won't stick together when in mass storage containers. Fourth, we should avoid shapes or features that will cause parts to tangle when in mass storage containers. Also, easy to handle, avoid very small or excessively large, slippery or sharp parts that could be difficult or hazardous to handle. Also, we have easy to handle, avoid very small or excessively large, slippery or sharp parts that could be difficult or hazardous to handle, followed by to reduce the count and part types, and finally, ensure sufficient access and visibility is provided. Now, having symmetrical or obviously asymmetrical shaped parts will ease the task of the assembler and also at the same time reduce mental load as the way in which the product should be assembled is much more obvious. So to some extent, the shape of the part acts as an unspoken intuitive work instruction to the assembler. And aside from that, it also contributes rather to time saving in assembly. The other guidelines are more related to physical ergonomics considerations and the reduction of poor postures and potential frustration areas for the operator, such as constantly having to spend time untangling small springs from each other or straining their neck to ensure parts are aligned and attached correctly. All right. So the next key subtopic that we will be discussing, that would be the use of fixtures. All right. So as you can see on the sample image, that is an example of a fixture. Providing assemblers with nothing but a table and a few tools would likely result in high levels of frustration, dissatisfaction, disorder, confusion, poor posture, MSDs, and eventually absenteeism of the employees. And to remedy these problems, carefully designed fixtures are installed at workstations to ease the mental workload on operators and improve performance and efficiency as well. So if it's a fixture, it is actually a device that holds or supports the workpiece during manufacturing operation. And fixtures can also be used to hold tools supporting their weight. So the operator only needs to ensure their position relative to the product and not taking the weight. Now, it enables the part to be held securely in a specific orientation, meaning freeing the user's hands so other parts can be attached to it and necessary processes such as tightening carried out. And aside from, also have what we call a jig. And a jig is a device that is pretty similar to a fixture, but also provides support in the processing operations by guiding cutting tools. Now, the complexity and usefulness of fixtures varies in some cases. A simple device locking the part to the tabletop is sufficient. However, for more complex, heavier products, a much more sophisticated fixture is necessary, with additional capabilities such as the ability to rotate, etc. And a number of considerations should be taken when designing fixtures to ensure they are optimizing the operator's capabilities both physically and cognitively, as they can play a significant role in providing the operator with cues and clues. So the considerations when designing fixtures, first, that would be the alignment of fixtures on the workstation should correspond to the order the assembly task should be carried out as well. And secondly, the alignment of fixtures should also be taken into consideration the way in which the material will be supplied to the workstation so as to reduce the time spent orienting the material. So in other words, by having a fixture that determines how the product should be oriented, the need to recall details from memory is reduced, which is particularly beneficial for operators who work on several product variants. And the shape of fixtures is often a negative form of the part or component that needs to be assembled, so also acts as a device to aid the assembler. And also we have kitting or the kitting bins. And as you can see on the sample images, those are examples of kitting bins. So what is meant by a kitting? It is a method where all the required components necessary to make a product or sub-assembly are delivered to the operator's workstation inside a container called a kitting bin. Now, the container often uses templates or is structured in such a way that the components can only be stored one way. So having a structured layout actually provides support for the assembler, indicating in which order the parts should be removed and assembled, while supporting the kiter by visually showing what parts are required and in what quantity. So therefore, the kit also acts as a memory trigger or early warning symbol, because if the box is not empty when the worker has completed their task, it is clear they have made an error somewhere during the assembly. While the value of this technique has been questioned from a material handling viewpoint, as we will see in a later chapter, there is no doubt that from a cognitive perspective, it benefits the operator. And next, we have standardized work. So if we say standardized work, it is a key part of lean manufacturing philosophy, and it stops everyone from taking "this is my way of doing things" approach, and rather provides an optimized standard method that all workers should take: assemblers, machine, maintenance, managers, etc. Therefore, this method means that workers don't need to choose between numerous possible ways of completing the task. Rather, there is only one clearly defined way, the best way. And by providing workers with a specific set method to carry out tasks, over time, the process will become ingrained in their memory, reducing the time and energy associated with memory recall. And by combining all the different elements of the worker's task into a sequence, then efficiency and productivity can be achieved, as well as cognitive support for the worker. Now, in Toyota's Total Quality Management Philosophy, or TQM philosophy, having standardized process is key, as it provides the baseline needed to facilitate continuous improvement, or Kaizen implementation of incremental change. Now, workers are actually encouraged to identify potential areas of improvement that could become the new standardized procedure, which helps to create a satisfying and fulfilling work environment. And standardized work generally involves a high level of documentation, okay? So this can be particularly beneficial for training purposes, making it easier for new personnel to get to grips with quickly. And also we have what we call work instructions, or in short, we have work eyes. So as you can see in the sample images, you have there examples of work instructions on how to assemble a bicycle. All right. So as you can see, there are processes with matching pictures, and the processes as well are briefly described. All right. So what is meant by work instruction then? If it's a work instruction, it is in its simplest form, it provides the operator with written guidelines or pictures of how the part should be assembled. Now, some work instructions can be quite open, meaning only specifying the key distances or torque required, with little guidance on the specific details of how the operator should actually perform the task. Other instructions utilize standardized work principles, meaning ensuring operators are aware of the only correct way of implementing the necessary task. Instructions can be provided in paper form or through specialized training. However, the recent trend is for production facilities to have computers and screens located at the workstation. Why is that? These provide operators with information and the necessary instructions, both text and pictures, as to how parts should be assembled. And the operator has access as well to all the parts stored on the system and can obtain the necessary information by entering the part identification number. And in some systems, instead of manually typing in the part identification number to view the instructions, the operator simply scans an ID card and instructions for the part in question are being provided. So this method contributes to quality control as all defects can be traced. And also we have POCA-UK, or also known as mistake proofing. Okay, so as you can see there in our sample images, you have there the first picture. First, you have there the word confusion, and then you applied POCA-UK or mistake proofing, and then you have there the word clarity. Okay, so it is specified as to what specific instruction should be done by the operator. And in the second picture as well, you have there, you can see there two cars. You have the black and the red behind the black car. And you have there indicated brake support and collision warning as well. So in other words, if we say POCA-UK, it is a term that originated in Japan, means mistake proofing, and is concerned with preventing errors from becoming defects before the fact. So many production facilities purposely implement tools, equipment, or procedures for error proofing, making it difficult for mistakes to be made. So by only providing one way of holding or storing the part, both kitting containers and fixtures at the workstations act as POCA-UK. So examples of POCA-UK, we have pick by barcodes, pick by light, pick by voice, and the andon system. So in order for us to better understand each of these examples, let us discuss them one by one, starting with pick by barcodes. So if we say pick by barcodes, as you can see there on the sample picture, that is an example of picking by barcode. So this method utilizes barcodes and an optical barcode scanner. The one can be seen on the picture. That's a barcode scanner. So a terminal provides the operator with real-time data collection information about where they need to go, what they need to pick, and in what quantity, using either text or images. So here, the operator uses the device to scan the barcode on the storage box, and the terminal provides them with information regarding the desired quantity. And also, the barcode scanner and terminal are either handheld, secured around the lower arm, or truck mounted. This system tends to be more cost-effective than pick by light in lower volume environments. However, unlike other picking systems, the operator needs to look at the screen to retrieve the necessary information, which can be an inconvenience. So this system is considered to be one step up from using a paper sheet to carry out picking tasks. However, it is not suitable for certain work environments when operators need to wear protective clothing such as gloves. Aside from pick by barcodes, we also have pick by light. So as you can see in the sample image, that is an example of how you pick by light. So this method uses lights positioned on shelves, okay, floor racks or workbenches to direct and indicate to the operator what they should do next. And at the right point in the sequence, the light will guide the operator to a certain location. And once they have completed the task, the light will either go off automatically based on the sensors, or the operator will manually confirm the action by clicking the illuminated button, as you can see on the sample image, triggering the next light in the sequence to illuminate. So in addition to a light, some systems are fitted with a display showing the necessary quantity or other information. And aside from pick by a light, you also have pick by voice. So what does it mean? So this system is similar to pick by light, but uses the sense of hearing to gain the operator's attention rather than lights. So here, each operator wears a headset, as you can see on the sample image. the operator is wearing a headset, okay, and is provided with the necessary information to know what to pick, in what quantity, and where it is located. So in this method, both the user's hands and eyes are free. And to confirm the pick, the operator can use voice control where they will repeat some of the product information. For example, the last four digits of the barcode, or etc. Or a sensor positioned in the container will detect their selection. So unlike pick by light, this technique can be used even when multiple operators are working in the same area. So the use of both pick by voice and pick by light make it relatively easy for new workers to learn their new work tasks quickly. And lastly, the last example of a Pokayoke, that would be the Andan system. So as you can see on the sample image, you have there an example of an Andan. So it's just like a lighting system where each color has different meanings. So for the red, you have their line stop. For the yellow, needs assistance. For the green, you have their station, operational. And for the blue, you have need material. So in this case, Andan systems provide a visual display that all workers can see to show the status of the plant floor. So enhanced visualization is said to not only create a sense of belonging in the teams, but also point out when problems on the process occur, alerting management, maintenance, and other workers down the line who depend on the affected station. So empowering operators to stop the production processes encourages an immediate response, which in turn should enhance the overall quality and reduce waste as well. So in general, here, the workers at the directly affected station pull a cord triggering an alarm or flashing lights to alert the rest of the workforce that a problem has occurred. And this can also be automated. And once the issue has been resolved, then the undone is deactivated so that work can continue as normal. And many industry facilities have undone coaches whose role is to resolve any issues as soon as they arise. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. If you have questions, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the latest updates. Thank you.